Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Backlog Banter Game of the Year breakdown. Today, we are going to be talking about Spider-Man 2. My name is, of course, Tucker Hazel. Today, I'm joined by my web-slaying co-hosts, Aaron Buter and Tanner Reicher here joining us today. The only one of the games that was nominated this year that he actually put time into.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to talk about that and, of course, have him join us. But we are going to be breaking down all the categories that for Jeff Keighley's Game Awards, Spider-Man 2 is nominated in, what its chances are at winning, and just sort of talking about like what it brings to this year, especially as basically PlayStation Studios' only game of the year. But if you want to talk to us about this or the other games that we've talked about, of course, those being Alan Wake 2 and Baldur's Gate 3 and Zelda and Mario and Resident Evil, you can join our Discord and you can leave comments and you can subscribe and you can like the video and all that stuff. But Abram, I don't care what you have to say because Tanner's here as a guest. Tanner, this is the only game from the Game of the Year nominees that you put a good amount of time into.
It's true.
And I'm curious to think, what would you consider one of your favorite games of the year?
Well, yes, absolutely. I would consider it one of my favorite games.
By default.
Because I've played a limited number, including like Street Fighter 6 is in that pile as well. But yeah, I mean, Spider-Man 2 is probably my favorite game of the year. I had a really great time with this. It just came out poorly timed in our lives. I had to we moved house in the midst of me playing through this game and stuff. So. Yeah, but I did finish it. I finished the story. I did not 100% the game, even though I feel compelled to because it is such a damn compelling game.
Yeah.
I think that this game is an improvement upon its predecessors in basically every regard. And of course, we'll be looking at this through the lens of its nominations. Yeah. So we'll get to talk about the cast and the narrative and the mechanics and all that stuff. But I think it's really, really great.
Yeah.
And I know that Tucker, you have 100% completed the game, correct?
Got the platinum. Yeah, I got the platinum in like 4 days, and that's like almost 30 hours of gameplay. So, well, who's to say? Did I like the game or not? Who's to say? Abram, this is a game you tried a little bit of, but through the lens of being a Game of the Year nominee, you think it fits in that category? And chances and all this stuff. We're bringing it all in a big stew.
Yeah. Let's just for the sake of anybody new jumping in, the nominees for Game of the Year are Alan Wake 2, Baldur's Gate 3, Tears of the Kingdom, Spider-Man 2, RE4, and Mario Wonder. I think that it's a pretty obvious nominee. As I was sort of talking about before the nominees even came out, this game was, of course, going to be lauded in the way that it was. Insomniac hasn't missed a nomination in a while. Obviously, Spider-Man got nominated. Rift Apart was also up for the Ratchet & Clank game in 2021, so it was essentially a foregone conclusion. Also, Sony rarely misses a slot if they've got a game, and they always do, right? So I am not surprised at all to see it here. I am very interested to sort of analyze the chances of this game because I think Insomniac inhabits, and this is sort of my takeaway from the couple hours I spent with the game, they inhabit this very interesting space in the larger ecosystem, and particularly as a sort of very pivotal studio for Sony, and that they really are Sony's workhorse studio. I mean, they're the ones knocking the games out, and that puts them in a very interesting position, I think, in that they have a responsibility, in whatever sense of that word you want to use, a responsibility to put out consistently very high quality games for PlayStation. And I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but for the lowest common denominator. These are big, huge, open world action, exactly what you'd expect from a Western AAA game, done to the highest level of quality and polish that you basically can. And so I think that puts Insomniac in this position where they are the team that makes the reliably great game. But I think they also make the predictably great game, and I mean that for better and worse. And so I don't know how strong Spider-Man 2's chances are. The sort of narrative I had thrown out, and I've thrown out on this series, I'm curious to discuss, is this notion of, would a win for Spider-Man 2 be in some ways a sort of lifetime award for Insomniac?
Return of the King type situation.
Okay.
Because obviously they lost to God of War in 2018, and Rift Apart lost to It Takes Two, but they're always here. Never the winner, though. So I think that there could
always
be
the bridesmaid, never sort the bride kind of deal. Yeah.
Exactly, Tanner. I think that they could have this sort of groundswell narrative behind them, and of course the game is nothing short of exceptional. But I just don't think that the game is particularly novel enough to stand up against Tears of the Kingdom and Baldur's Gate.
This may be a different conversation unto itself, but just so I'm on the level with you guys, can I get your what will win the game of the year this year?
Because you're not as into this
Absolutely
as we
not.
are. We are just a few days away from the Game Awards, so you will be learning on the night of that conversation. But so the current front runner is Baldur's Gate 3.
Okay.
And then Tears of the Kingdom, the Zelda game Tears of the Kingdom is also in that conversation. And then Alan Wake 2 probably also there. And then I might put Spider-Man 2 fourth, just in terms of quality and popularity.
Sure.
And then Mario Wonder and Resident Evil also somewhere in that slot. I think those Mario Wonder and Spider-Man 2 I think are kind of fighting neck and neck for that fourth slot. But it is of course all vibes-based analysis here. But yeah, I think that this is, for me, this is the kind of game that I want getting Game of the Year, not in terms of it being incredibly forward-thinking in a ton of ways, but in terms of this is one of the highest quality video games I've ever played. And when you want to talk about a game being great from its visual fidelity and the performances and the writing and the stories and the technical improvements that it has, because I think its technical fidelity and load times and all that are probably where it shines the greatest, and where I would probably make a contention that it is, in that regard, a very forward-thinking and industry-pushing forward game.
Yeah.
But it isn't the game I would want to win, because I do think it lacks that this feels new spark that frankly that first game had. I mean, that was the best Spider-Man game ever made to that point in time, and it was incredible and had the fidelity and had all that stuff, but it was just edged out by Red Dead 2 and God of War, which are even more forward-thinking games. But this is the best game that Insomniac has ever made, in my opinion. I think it's the best out of the three games. I think it does do things that are industry pushing forward, but I don't want it to win. Even though it's one of my favorite games of the year, I think that this is a great game to be nominated. Because when you're 10 years from now and you're looking back and you're like, what great games came out the year? Yeah, Spider-Man 2 is 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 in basically every category. It deserves to be among these nominees. But it is not that industry next step spark that the first game was.
Yeah.
And I think that there's an important perhaps parallel to be made to what a lot of massive blockbusters are, right? I mean, we're beginning to see the Oscars recognize those a little bit more in the likes of Avatar and Top Gun or whatever. But when you're just out here to make a...
Please, Tucker, please. We're still in mourning. We're still in mourning.
It will happen next year. It will.
That's a long, it's a long time coming. But anyway, Abram.
But point being, when you're out to make a really big, really good blockbuster and you succeed by those merits, who really gives a fuck if you win Game of the Year or not? And I do think that's in part where I come down on Spider-Man 2. I mean, it is the fastest selling game in PlayStation's history. It scored exceptionally well. It's going to keep being played. I think all the benchmarks of success for Spider-Man 2 are here. And I think you're totally right about the sort of slick nature of the presentation and the technical element of the game and everything. But I personally fail to view that as something that's especially industry pushing, in that they're just a little, because of the resources they have, they're a little bit further ahead to the instantaneous fast travel than everybody else is going to be in a year down the line. I think that Spider-Man 2, where it probably to me makes more sense picking up awards, is in some of these quote-unquote smaller categories, as we're going to talk about.
And do we want to move on to any of these other categories?
Let's end the video.
That's too quick.
Well, I did want to note, before we get into the nominations themselves, that it really does feel like I'm coming in and saying, like, I'm coming in for the Top Gun Maverick review of the Best Picture nominees here. Where I was like, I didn't see a lot of the other movies. I didn't see Tar. I didn't see Banshees of Inisherin. Didn't see Everything Everywhere at Once. But fucking Top Gun Maverick was a whole lot of fun, wasn't it, guys?
Yeah.
I think that blockbuster allegory is very apt, Abram.
Yeah. But it was still nominated for Best Game Direction, and I today will be making the case why I believe that it is worthy of that nomination.
Okay.
The nominees for Best Game Direction being Alan Wake 2, Baldur's Gate 3, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Marvel Spider-Man 2, and Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Now, Best Game Direction is a category that over the course of these last 5 videos, we've had a lot of conversation about, because all of the nominees here are Game of the Year nominees. We've had a lot of chances to dig into what this means, not only to us, but to the people voting, to what this would mean, any of these would mean if they won this category. And interestingly enough, I think Spider-Man 2, for me, parallels the best of how I view, again, blockbuster directing. In terms of everything feels very cohesive, and I think there are some elements of it that I will talk about in game direction where it does take a step forward. But I think this is probably the least likely to win best game direction because it is the most similar to what came before. And these other games, I think, have a lot better narratives in terms of what new ideas, new creative visions they brought to the table, why they would win game direction. But I personally, and again, as I'll break down a little bit, think that this is a very, very, very deserving nominee for best game direction.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in and say that I would agree that, it's one of those things where every aspect feels locked in at like a 10 from a directorial like overarching view of the design of the game. But I understand why it probably won't win. I mean, you look at some of these other titles here and you're like, yeah, some of them are a bit more, I don't know, audacious, you might say. Sure. a bit more, it takes some creative liberties, some visual liberties, where Spider-Man 2 is very much interested in recreating reality and like making you feel like you're Spider-Man in real New York. And it's really advancing a lot of the abilities and aspects of the first two games without adding anything really different. Sure. I would say, unless I'm severely overlooking something, in which case I'll rescind that statement. But like all the new abilities are very much like they feel like the logical next steps in advancement in that regard. The other thing I would maybe say is the traversal, which I think also gets into the action adventure nomination as well. But yeah, I would just say that it's a very well directed. Just like I would say that Top Gun Maverick is a very well directed film, expertly so. But it doesn't feel distinct in like an award winning manner.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah, I think, Tanner, you make a really good point in what you're sort of talking about in this general sense. I boil down to what was my main takeaway from my time with Spider-Man 2, which is this is a very, very confident team coming back for their third whack at the same ball. When the game opens and you're fighting Sandman, and we're so quickly into the tempo of character relationships, and then we're jumping into this big set piece, and we're moving through the city, and it's very big, and it's very dynamic, and it's very cinematic in the way that you expect out of a PlayStation title. It's very obvious that Insomniac has been refining this particular craft.
This isn't their first time,
and I think
doing
that
this.
Right, and I think that's ultimately the problem, and this is. I don't mean this to be as disparaging as it's going to sound, but like the blueprint is here. You could have Brian Intihar.
Yes,
Intihar, thank you. I've only ever seen his name in print. Brian Intihar could walk away.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry.
Brian. I apologize. Brian could step away and start a new studio, and I'm certain that because these games are developed. Not only directed by a number of people, but because this blueprint is sent, I think you could have another team come in, pick this up, and it'd be fine. Now, that's not to discredit the quality of the game. To the contrary, I think it's an illustration of the fact that they've established such a strong formula that it exists now. And so you could bring in other talented Sony creatives to move it forward. But I think it's also a testament to the fact that I don't think that the risk is here. Yeah. And I think that a big part of interesting game direction is having to address risk in new concepts and everything. And when you look at all the other nominees, there's a lot more new being done. Absolutely. Even in something, as we've talked about with Tears of the Kingdom, which was routinely derided for being just DLC or whatever people want to say about it.
Video,
that physics
is, you don't understand DLC, you fucking idiot. This is not how DLC works.
The physics engine alone introducing that game opens up so many bizarre.
The guy with the river?
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah. That opens up so many bizarre potential mechanical interactions and design level implications that it takes a very visionary team, even a team working a familiar framework, to make that happen. I don't think that Spider-Man 2 gets far enough away from the framework they've established for it to be a sort of design direction leader here. I think it is last place in the category, personally.
And so if it wasn't obvious from this conversation so far, I'm sort of letting you guys take the lead on this. But Abram, you mentioned a couple things there that I just like to sort of talk about in specific, just because like that Sandman opening set piece is maybe one of my top 10 most memorable gaming moments, I think now. It is
really good.
A massive spectacle on a scale that I mean has nearly been seen in video games before, at least in my experience. And I think it makes full use of the hardware, makes full use of the, I'm not going to know all of the terminology here, but the full rendering of the world. There's a name for that, right? The full
the SSD
I
loads
think
the world
that's the
very fast way.
Yes, the SSD.
Yeah. And you're switching between Miles and
Yes.
Peter immediately in the sequence and everything. You're totally right.
And there's
just the power of the PS5.
The power of the PS5 is used to its full potential, which I think, to Tucker's point, maybe this is encroaching on a closing statement as well, is like, yes, it's not changing the industry perhaps in a lot of ways, but I think it is making full use of the hardware in a way that we've not seen many next-gen games, or current-gen games, I guess, do.
No, absolutely. And I think that is one of the elements of this game, not only on a technical level, but on a narrative level. I think this game does do industry-pushing things. The way that Insomniac, because of their relationship with PlayStation, because this isn't their first crack at this, are able to take the power of the hardware and allow it to expand their storytelling potential and their gameplay potential, I think is really bar none. And the fact that you are able to do fast travel in a way that I've never experienced before, and like, this is the kind of step forward in video games, like, oh god, like, it makes you shiver, like, oh man, like, look how bad we had it before, like, sitting there and like watching Peter ride on the bus. Of course, that wasn't terrible, but this is like, I didn't know how good or how bad it was until I had the thing that like fixed it, that kind of thing.
Well, and Tucker, to your point, and this is I appreciate the segue into narrative, but for a moment, I do want to say, like, so you use the fast travel system in Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
I don't.
Sure.
I don't use a fast travel system, and I think that is because the traversal feels so fine-tuned.
Sure.
They expand the map obviously in Spider-Man 2, and so I think I saw a side-by-side comparison of like the travel speed and just how much faster it feels in Spider-Man 2, how much faster it is actually in Spider-Man 2.
But it feels just as controllable.
It feels just as
I think
controlled.
This is really what I'm going to hone in on in terms of this being a nominee for game direction. Is yes, it does not have the distinct creative vision that these other 4 games have, and that's why I would say this is at the bottom of that category, even for me. But I do think that in terms of telling a dual narrative, the way that the missions are paced out and you're switching back and forth and you're able to switch on a dime, the power of the hardware, the direction of this game in terms of its story and its gameplay, everything is synergized in a very, very powerful way into, like, much like Rift Apart was a few years ago, using SSD to render multiple worlds very, very quickly. The power of the hardware that the PS5 specifically has enhances the storytelling potential that they're doing here, and I think that they handled this very well. Again, dual narrative stuff hasn't necessarily been done before in their games. The fact that you are equally playing as Peter and Miles, and then their skill trees are separate but sometimes interconnected. I think that, on top of this being a polished world and technically impressive and a lot more life on the streets, more cars, more NPCs. It is the realization that comes from a powerful creative team working together for years. And I think the final point that I want to make in terms of game direction is I think this might be one of the most polished and fluffless open world games ever made.
Oh, sure.
This is a platinum that is able to be gotten in 25 hours, and not because it is a short game, but because they removed all the horse shit. Every quest is interesting. They're all diverse. All the collectibles are just the right amount. They are paced at the just right pace as you get them throughout the game. They're just spaced out enough. They each feel different in different ways. They all lead to something, which I think is a really great way of utilizing side quests and collectibles. There's always narrative stuff once you've gotten all of them. The way that they synergize each element of the game is really unparalleled. And so, while I do think I also err on the side of I want that wacky new thing that, even if it isn't perfect, is more interesting, I do think there really is something to be said of they have honed this. I mean, this is a masterclass in synergizing game feel and story and mechanics and fidelity. It's like everything works together, and that doesn't happen by accident. You need some of the most skilled people in the medium to know when to cut things and know when to cut back and forth and how to tell a story with a whole wide cast of compelling characters, because you are not only combining Peter
and Miles.
And Peter and Miles, but then Miles has like multiple new side characters, and Harry Osborn shows up for the first time. There's like 3 different new villains, and they balance this stuff. And that is direction, is managing a massive scope and tons of moving pieces and having it work as flawlessly as it does in terms of just being a smooth experience. That might be my biggest takeaway from this game. Is I think it's a honed, finely crafted, and directed adventure.
Yeah.
And that also, again, does come down to the narrative that I think does help set it apart from its previous iterations, which the nominees in Best Narrative are Alan Wake 2, Baldur's Gate 3, Cyberpunk 2077, Final Fantasy 16, and Marvel's Spider-Man 2.
Phantom Liberty of Cyberpunk
right.
2077 as well. That game that came out 3 years ago did not get nominated in Best Narrative this year.
Yes. But Tanner, as the only game here that you've played, but as a game that you recently finished, as in within the last 24 hours, actually, the narrative, how do you feel about this?
I think that the story of Spider-Man 2 is very, very good. And yes, it's very well integrated in terms of we have our 2 Spider-Men now. We're switching back and forth between them. However, I feel, and I don't think that I'm alone in this criticism. I've seen it other places as well.
Yeah.
That Miles feels a bit underserved in the narrative, I think.
Okay.
Just in the way that Peter's story is he's doing the Venom Venom narrative, which has been done in basically every long-running iteration of Spider-Man that there is. And so Miles, I feel, takes a bit of a back seat, I feel. I found myself playing as Peter more just because I wasn't switching between characters as much, as often. And I think it's because, I think that I feel like a lot of the missions ended with you playing as Peter, just because he gets a lot more play, and so I was just in the free open world, I was playing as Peter a lot more. So in Miles' narrative is essentially, sort of playing off of the events of Spider-Man Miles Morales, wherein Martin Lee as the driving force there, and he has killed Jefferson Davis. And so that seems to be the bulk of Miles' story there, is like coming to terms with that and sort of coming into his own a little bit, working alongside Peter, but also like having that classic Spider-Man narrative experience wherein he is like, he's taken everything from me, but I have to take the moral high ground here. I can't forgive him, but I can move past it, essentially. And so that's Miles' story, but Spider-Man Peter Parker gets the Venom story. Yeah. And that's just a lot more time and effort, and like he gets to have the symbiote and be bully Peter and then come back from that. And he gets Harry in there. We get to explore Peter's background as like a high schooler and stuff like that. So I feel like Peter got a lot more play. And I don't know if I'm out of line here. You can weigh in if you'd like, but...
Well, here's the interesting thing, is I agree, but I don't see that as necessarily a narrative criticism, because I think it is more balanced than maybe you're letting on. And I think that there is a chance that is because you haven't gone for all the collectibles, because
that's fair
most of the side quests and most of the collectible stories do center around Miles. When you're doing the Mysterio things, that's all Miles. When you're doing all the side quests around the college that that Miles is going to, that's all Miles. And so the narrative of this game, I think, is fractaled in enough ways to where I never felt that I was doing one or the other. But I also do think that this being the scale being on Peter's side is intentional, not only because the last game was Miles' story solely. Peter was not in that game almost at all, but because this is the end of Peter Parker's Spider-Man story.
That's fair point.
And too. So this is the sort of last hurrah for that, and you want to get the Black Suit story under the line. You want to get a Harry Osborn in there. But I do think that Miles and Peter's, the balance is exciting enough for me, and their dynamic, which is something that has never been tested before in this video game way, is core enough to the narrative, because Peter's always calling Miles, and you're always getting the you even get Miles like interacting with Harry and with MJ, and then obviously Miles has the much wider supporting cast, and Genki is always around, and you're going to talk to his mom and Haley and like all these people that he knows, and his identity as a person of color in Harlem informs basically all the side quests.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That is a lot of the story and world of this game. And I really do think that it, again, is the balance of all these pieces that, for me, really works. And so I would agree that Miles doesn't get the screen time and presence that Peter does. But I do think that narratively that makes sense. Thematically, they make sense. The way that they tie his Ren story against Mr. Negative into the Kraven story, who is trying to get the strongest people, so he's capturing all these villains, and then also that plays into the redemption arc story of the fact that people like Mysterio and Tombstone and Sandman are trying to make themselves not be bad guys anymore. And the way that then that parallels with Harry's story, and then the Venom symbiote story, and then one of my favorite twists and elements of this is the fact that Kraven is the one that ends up pushing Peter to be a more aggressive Venom, because Venom is the strongest character in this world, and Kraven wants that last fight, and he's dying, and Harry's dying. It's like there is so much thematic stuff going on here where you can tie in. The Kraven's Last Hunt story perfectly parallels with this new story of Harry being a symbiote.
It's a very good passing of the baton between these classic Spider-Man narratives that all get weaved in.
And it creates such a unique story. Like, there is no, this is a normal, usual version of this story. This is intersecting with this, and the cast feels new.
It's like what the movies do, too, because with these games and with the movies as well, you have we can't make an issue a week or a movie a week with these, so we have to, the storylines, what we want to do, we have to find a way to blend them. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In Spider-Man 2, it very much works. Abram, sorry, you haven't talked for a long time.
No, I was just listening. I think what you guys are saying is interesting, but I'm just not sure it really is compelling to the people voting for Game of the Year. And I think this is ultimately the difference, right? Because as you guys are sort of getting into the thematics of the narrative and everything, I think that this is very compelling and very interesting if you're really in it, right? But I think if you're not, if you're looking from 40,000 feet, if you're voting in the category, it is another story with Miles and Peter, and it is another Spider-Man gets the symbiote story, and here's Venom, and da-da-da-da-da, right? I think that what you guys are talking about is in some ways the Insider Baseball, Tucker, of you and I talking about the ways that Wonder recontextualizes Mario. Sure. I ended up with Munder in the middle trying to say Mario and Wonder, but I think that if you're not in that,
Wonder. Wario Munder. I said the actual thing. Wario Munder.
Wario Munder's good.
I would love that, but I think that's ultimately the problem. It's I think it's the same thing that in part holds back Mario of.
Or a Munder flower, rather.
If you don't care about, if you don't know what Kraven's Last Hunt story is, and you don't know what this means, and you're not trying to weave these pieces together, that's nothing in comparison to Baldur's Gate 3 and the scale of the storytelling there, and the ways that storytelling ends up being shaped by the player in a way that is so complicated solely on a writing level, before we even talk about trying to script that narrative, and the ways that it branches, and the ways that you're playing with the player across 100 hours and bringing them to important nodes and moving on, right? I mean, there's a lot more moving pieces in there. And then Tucker, as Tucker and I have been talking about, Tanner, the structural innovation to how Alan Wake 2 tells its story, I think that there's a lot more obviously successful or compelling narratives in Spider-Man 2. Not because Spider-Man 2 is bad, but I think, again, the entire point that I attacked this game from as somebody who played a couple hours and got it, but just knew it wasn't going to be my thing is, we're doing Spider-Man again. And I think when you have to stop and tell people, okay, yes, but here's why the balance works, and okay, yes, it's familiar storylines, but this is why they're different, I just think you're losing in this larger
I think that just
competition.
I think that just comes with the territory of you're making a story about a character who has basically a movie every 2 years, and always has an ongoing cartoon on Disney Plus or something like that, and broadly speaking is one of the most popular cultural IP figures of all time.
As opposed to Alan Wake, who'll get there. When we're 80 years into the history of Alan Wake, and he's having 6 different actors play him, we'll get the same complaint.
And it does. And Abram, you're right.
We're on Baldur's Gate 20.
to the average voter, it'd be like, it's like, well, yes, it's doing the Kraven's Last Hunt story, which has been done a couple of times, but here's why it works particularly well in conversation with all these other storylines. So I think that's a great point. And Tucker, I thank you for also sort of bringing into context how this is likely, or the Insomniac has said that Miles is the main Spider-Man going forward in their games.
That shitty suit,
but I thought I beat it. Listen, this is a little aside into my experience. So I did the second to last mission. He's in the where he gets the suit, and I'm like, no, I'm gonna change it. I change it to the suit that I prefer. And then we get into the last mission, and he's just wearing it anyway. And Peter's wearing the anti-venom suit anyway. I was like, oh, okay, so it doesn't matter. Okay. I don't know. That frustrated me too. It was like, you figured it out for the whole time, but why does it have to be this way in the final mission?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. What else? What else was I going to say?
Well, here's the thing about the narrative. I agree with you entirely, Abram. I do think that there is a little bit of a balance towards just having a little bit more of a chance because this is one of the most popular games that is nominated, and most people voting are fans of Spider-Man in some regard. So I think that even though it does require to a total outsider that explanation of, okay, yeah, this has been done before, but I feel like enough people voting are in on that but. Is they're like, oh yeah, I know why this version of a Black Suit storyline is different and unique and fits into Insomniac's world. And also I think that Final Fantasy XVI's narrative, a little bit controversial, and Phantom Liberty as an expansion, I think people kind of put a little bit lower. So I would probably put this third, but I do think that Baldur's Gate and Alan Wake 2, there's no fucking chance anything other than those two win. So we're talking semantics at a certain point.
Yeah.
There. But I think this is strong enough thematically and performance-wise especially, as we'll get into performances, that it deserves to be up there for me.
Yeah.
It's certainly the narrative that I've thought the most about this year.
We want to talk about Yuri Lowenthal?
Yeah, we can jump to performance.
Okay. Was there anything else we wanted to talk about with story? Okay, sounds good.
It's just that, see, next week, Tanner, we got a whole system. You're coming in, you're telling us, let's go to performance before audio design.
Well,
and
Tucker
it just makes
mentioned,
me all nervous.
I know it comes first in the nomination list, but Tucker mentioned performance, so I was like, oh,
you want to read out the performance nominations?
Let's do it, yeah.
Oh, sure. Tucker, I would love to.
Sure.
Well, let's see if there's any in here that I flub. Okay. The nominees for Best Performance in a Video Game in 2023 is Idris Elba as Solomon Reed in Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty. Melanie Libourde as Saga Anderson in Alan Wake 2. Yuri Lowenthal as Peter Parker, or Spider-Man, in Marvel Spider-Man 2. Cameron Monaghan as Cal Kestis in Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Neil Newbon as, Astarion?
Yeah, perfect.
Astarion in Baldur's Gate 3. And Ben Starr as Clive Rossfield in Final Fantasy 16.
You did a really good job there, buddy.
Thank you. Thank you
pat
very
on the
much.
back, pat on the head, rub on the belly.
So Yuri Lowenthal.
Yeah.
He's been Spider-Man a couple times.
Yes.
He's been a lot of other video games characters too.
Yeah.
And a lot of other voices as well. He's probably the most popular voice actor on this list. Idris Elba's on this list, so I won't say actor. But I think he does a really good job. I mean, who am I to say, like, who am I to critique the performance of this guy who has hundreds of credits in all various forms of media?
Yeah.
I think he does a really good job as Peter. The only thing I will say, and I said I wasn't going to critique him, but I will, is, and this is maybe just like a nerd criticism of like other interpretations of the Black Suit story, but I feel like he's got a bit too much boyishness to really sell the like, I'm Black Suit Peter and I'm being mean. Like all his like lines, it was like where he's being like edgy bully Peter. I was like, I'm not buying it. I don't know if it's the writing and I don't know if it's him. I don't know which one it is, but I'm like, it doesn't feel like you have the opportunity to be like, to really push it here and make me feel like Peter is changing. I think it might be a narrative thing too, just going back to it. Like, I don't feel like Peter became dark and twisted and angry enough as a character. But by and large, he does a great job. There are emotional moments that he sells, especially at the end of the game, with Harry, with Miles, with MJ. Like, Yuri Lowenthal's bringing it in all those other aspects, I think for sure. And I don't know how this category fills out or any of these other characters, so I'll be interested to hear you guys sort of talk about how he stacks up against these other performances.
Yeah. Abram?
I just don't know why if he didn't win I know why he didn't win in 2018, because you're going up against Arthur Morgan and up against Mr. Kratos, right?
Christopher Judge won twice as fucking Kratos.
Yeah. I just don't think that Yuri Lowenthal is a especially exciting nomination here, which is, again, not a testament of the quality of the performance he gives. But as we've been saying, Tanner, to clue you in, this is the most locked category of the night, because it's going to Ben Starr as Clive in Final Fantasy, who not only gives a good performance, but is also sort of, I think it is fair to say, maybe the golden boy of the games industry this year.
Okay.
Which is not to say, again, it's not a win for nepotism, but he is friends with everybody. Sure. He is a very, very, again, as of just the last award show he's attending, a very strong voice for the medium, talking about, he recently was interviewed at the Future Games Show where they asked, hey, Ben, do you think this is the best year for games ever? And he said, it's the best year for games that we played, but it's one of the worst years for the industry, and this is what we need to do to improve conditions and various things.
He's campaign. Is he the first performance nominee to campaign in this category?
He is one of them, I would say. So I think that he's doing it on the trail in a way that a lot of guys aren't. But I wouldn't even say that Yuri would be number 2 on this list. The more I hear about it, the more I do believe that Neil Newbin as Astarion is probably number 2. The way people laud the performance quality of that game. Again, I just think that those are games with stronger narratives here, other than another really good performance from Yuri Lowenthal. Because we were even talking in our Zelda video about my belief that, hey, maybe you should put Matt Mercer as Ganondorf into the category. And the more I reflect on that, yes, I think that Matt Mercer should be in there, but another great performance from Matt Mercer is not going to win. And I think it's the same for Yuri. It's Ben's award.
I think this is another good example of what we were talking about at the top for Game of the Year of, I would be upset if Yuri Lowenthal was not nominated here, because he does a phenomenal job, and it's one of the best performances he's ever given, and it's one of the best performances of the year. But it does lack that next spark. And though the unfortunate part is, okay, he didn't win in 2018. He was up against incredible competition there. He's up against very good competition here, but I don't think as legendary as Arthur Morgan and Kratos. But this was the other chance, is because he's doing black suit Spider-Man here.
Yep.
Where he gets to be edgy and he gets to have this wide range of vocal tones and emotions that he wasn't able to have in those previous games, because bringing in Harry and then having flashbacks and then having a lot more personal strife there between him and Harry, as Harry ends up being the villain.
Yeah.
And with MJ and all of that, this is probably his best performance, but I also agree that it would be a easily deserving, but not particularly exciting winner of, he gave a phenomenal performance, one of the best of the year, maybe one of the best of all time. If he won this, I certainly wouldn't be upset, but it's like, Ben Starr is a new voice for a new character, and once we get Ben Starr's 6th performance where he's great, we'll be like, all right, give someone else a chance. And even though Yuri hasn't won, he's been one of the most respected video game voice actors for his entire career, and so he just feels like he's kind of like, okay, Meryl Streep got nominated.
Yeah,
Meryl Streep does a fucking awesome job. Like, she deserves to be in there.
I was trying to find the Oscars in. I was like, probably like a Meryl Streep. Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's pivot over to Best Audio Design, the nominees being Alan Wake 2, Hi-Fi Rush, Dead Space, Resident Evil 4, and Marvel's Spider-Man 2.
Best Audio Design is interesting here, because we've talked a mean game in our last few videos about how there's a lot of fucking survival horror games here, and they kind of all do the same thing in terms of the audio design, and it's probably either going to be one of those, they're going to split it, there's a whole thing going on here. Does audio design mean, do people include music in that, and if so, it's Hi-Fi Rush. I think that in terms of traditionally understood audio design, that doesn't just like jump out at you, Marvel Spider-Man 2 is probably one of the best of the year, because it does include the most variety. There is the most going on in this fucking game as you are swinging and the sound is changing around you and you're passing cars and there are people down the street and there's honking and there's fucking music playing off in the distance. This is a mixed, complicated audio design that richly realizes the world of New York and incorporates some crazy sci-fi horse shit, because you're fighting fucking venomized people and Kraven's fucking tiger, and like there's a bunch of nonsense going on here, and so I think this is a very good nominee here, least likely to win by a fucking country mile.
Interesting.
I think, Tucker, I actually think that you're entirely wrong, because I don't think that there's a universe in which a game that tries to have sound come out of my controller should ever get nominated for Best Audio
So not Smash Bros. Brawl?
That's my opinion.
Obi.
Hey. Oh, man.
But no, Tucker, you're totally right. And I think that this game is in an interesting position where I want to read out what the Game Awards recognizes as the understanding of audio design.
There we go.
they say recognizing the best in-game audio and sound design, which is to say they basically give you no real indication what the category means.
How does sound go?
And so I think that the...
How sound good? How sound goo?
I think what you're talking about, Tucker, is that the audio design of Spider-Man 2 is exceptional in that for a lot of it, it is very natural. It is you are in a city. This is what the city sounds like. But I think the problem is that it doesn't stand out necessarily. The way, to your point about there being this exceptionally high quality, but this very low likelihood of a win. And I think that is the case. Survival horror usually does well in a category like this because the audio is so foregrounded. But Tanner, as I've been saying, I think that if people interpret audio design as how the audio is designed, just like looking at the three words and be like, what could this mean to me? I think Hi-Fi Rush is the...
Design. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think that lends itself to... Yeah, it lends itself to Hi-Fi Rush winning in that game is predicated entirely on audio. The everything it works the tempo of the music and the mechanics are intrinsically linked. So I think that is going to be the way that people read this category, and if they read it more along the lines of just the implementation of sound divorced from mechanics, I still think you're going to be captivated by. In Alan Wake 2, there's this entire cityscape wherein there are these ghosts that whisper, Alan Wake, constantly. And there's this really great sense of disorientation. And I think that these other games, the experimental nature inherent to their genre and their audio is going to beat Spider-Man 2, which is not, again, a indictment of its quality, but just the narrative success, narrative in terms of the narrative to win, the narrative success of its competition here.
It's kind of how people view the makeup and hairstyling award for the Oscars.
Oh,
and
sure.
Like, most makeup wins. Most makeup that looks like fucking makeup that jumped out at you and then made a guy look like another guy. That's just going to win.
Yeah.
Now, of course, not necessarily saying that's not deserving of the win, but it's the one that jumps out at you of like, wow, that's unusual. It is unusual what they did with Hi-Fi Rush or what they did with Alan Wake 2. It's not unusual what they did with Marvel Spider-Man 2 sound design. They did what was required of them, and the genre and design of that game does not lend itself to it being one of the most uniquely sound designed games of the year, but it just is what it is, and they did a phenomenal job, but it's not most sound design, which maybe was Hi-Fi Rush.
I mean, it's like the editing or sound, even the sound nomination at the Oscars as well. Sure. It's like most editing, most sound. What jumped out at you most? What makes you what moments do you remember of those things?
Yeah.
Not necessarily like what was on the whole the best, most even-handed implementation of all of it, the most masterful of it.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting comparison, because I think what that kind of describes is, okay, Marvel Spider-Man 2 might be the best sound design here in terms of its complexity and its realization of the world. But when we think about what we want to win, we want what does something different. And that's why I think that, again, deserving to be in all these categories, but I don't think we've mentioned a single one where I think it's going to win, because it's just
gonna get
great,
to that,
but it's not special. And I think that's your major criticism of it, Abram, is they did what they needed to do, but unlike these other games, this doesn't feel like the next step in innovation.
This is going to be my closing thought, but I guess I'll throw it out there now, is that it's interesting, and we got one more nomination to get to as well. Two.
Action, adventure, and innovation.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, two. Excuse me.
You know what, Tanner? I'm gonna make you fucking put a pin in that. Fine. We're gonna go to the next category.
Fine. I'm happy about it.
We're gonna go to the next category, and I want one of you guys to read out the nominees, because Paul is upset by all this. Spider-Man 2 is not gonna win. He's trying.
He's like, I wanted to.
So I'm gonna let him leave. You read the nominees.
Yeah. The nominees are, for Best Action/Adventure Game, Alan Wake 2, The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, Marvel's Spider-Man 2, Resident Evil 4, and Star Wars Jedi Survivor.
Yeah, we gotta put that break in there for Survivor.
Well, I need to put the break in there as like, stall just one more second till I move.
Okay.
That was perfect. Best Action Adventure Game.
It's well done.
Go.
Yeah, so this is in a just society, Jedi Survivor would win and there would be no competition. But we don't. We live in a world of great injustice, and we all hate injustice and inequality here on the channel.
It's true.
Injustice too, though.
And so this category really comes down to Spider-Man versus Zelda. But I think that as we've talked about, Tucker, and I really have been trying to pinpoint my exact feelings on the likelihood of Spider-Man winning these various categories, the likelihood of it not walking home with Game of the Year, but instead it takes action adventure or vice versa or whatever. Because I think that Spider-Man and Zelda are similarly entitled to the award. Yeah. But I think that Tears of the Kingdom does win. I just think that, again, the refrain we've been sharing is going to continue to be shared here of what Tears of the Kingdom does is extremely new. But at the same time, and this is debatable, but Tears of the Kingdom is a game of the same, if not a higher quality than Spider-Man 2. So it's not just a case of newness over polish. It is polish, and it is vision, and it is quality, and it is original in some key ways, right? Again, these are iterative sequels, but one's iteration stays quite close to the previous games, and the other is including new places along an axis, and it's given you a physics engine that literally is making developers cry tears of joy and frustration that they could never make something like that. So Tears of the Kingdom. Yeah. So I do think, even though Spider-Man has a clear justification for winning the category, I just don't think it beats Zelda.
So I wanted to hop in here because I just had a fun little exercise going on in my mind.
Sure. Crunches.
While I was they were doing crunches in my mind. Where I was like, Marvel Spider-Man 2 and then Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Okay, well, I can understand, this would be a good phrase. Marvel Spider-Man 2 was the best action game, but Legend of Zelda was the best adventure game. Yeah. And then I looked just to the left on this Wikipedia article, and it says best action game. I was like, oh, there's a different category for that. But I stand by that statement, having not played Tears of the Kingdom, because I'm sure that, yes, there's the physics engine that I've heard so many people talk about, and when we fucked around with for a little bit when we played the game. But and I may be outing myself here as a noob gamer, being like, I like the Arkham combat system.
Yeah.
That has been just kind of copied and pasted into Spider-Man 2. With more variety, of course. Right. There's you can operate on, to Abraham's point, a Z and a Y axis kind of in the combat. I love just seeing how long I can stick up in the air while I'm punching people down, and I'm swinging people up, and I'm flinging people down, and I'm bouncing them off the floor back up to me. The action in Spider-Man 2 is so fun to me, especially when I got into late game and I upgraded all my all the special abilities and the gadgets and stuff like that, where they were just regenerating very quickly, where I could just string those together, and especially in the end game, they're also throwing just hordes of venom of symbiotes at you, and I'm just gonna fucking decimate this crowd with the special abilities and gadgets right now, and I had a fucking blast doing that, and it feels really good to me just to see a yellow flash above an enemy's head and be like, oh, I'm gonna do a sweet cinematic parry of them right now. It feels good to me. I don't know what to tell you. It's simple. Yeah. It's it's something that I could do when I was 13. It's something I can do when I'm 23. But it feels very, very good.
You're totally right, Tanner. If I may just jump in on that point, it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of, again, Spider-Man 2, Insomniac's whole vision is, let's make the biggest, most accessible, most appealing to everybody open world third-person action adventure game that we can. And the combat I've never found compelling in Spider-Man, in that it is just Arkham combat, and I've never liked Arkham combat, which is a personal flaw of mine that I have to deal with.
I agree, Abram. I agree. You just want to be Batman and or Spider-Man. That's it, and it's the easiest way to do that.
Yeah, I think that if we're going to look at what this game does particularly well on the action-adventure side of the dash, I think you have to look at the adventure side, and you have to talk about the traversal, because that's what these games have always cut their teeth on in a very particular way. And the swinging is really cool. The little web wings are cool. The ways you can chain them into each other. I mean, there's no contesting that this is a brilliant, brilliant system, and it is why I think the game does give Tears of the Kingdom some kind of competition here, where they're punching at commensurate weights, even if I think the Zelda punch is a little bit higher. I just ultimately feel that the fatigue that we thought was going to hamper Zelda's reception instead has hampered Spider-Man's. Sure. And that I just think that Zelda found a way to get further from. And to your point from earlier, Tanner, Insomniac got deeper into. If Zelda is a moving away from Breath of the Wild in the same context, in a similar context, Spider-Man 2 is saying, hey, here's Spider-Man. Let's just double down on everything Spider-Man. And I think that's really the philosophical difference there.
I mean, I talked about the traversal a little bit, I think, when I brought up how Tucker used the fast travel system and I don't. And it ties into the, the adventure element of the game of how, like, hey, it's a game that makes you feel like you're Spider-Man. Has anyone said this already? Has anyone said this? Where
you're gonna get clipped by Donkey.
Where I get to swing across the city. I don't want to hop on a train. I don't want to just pop over to whatever area I'm supposed to go. I want to swing across the city. I want to get pulled off by seeing a crime happen.
Yeah.
And because you know what? That's what fucking Spider-Man would do, god damn it. And I'm like, I'm playing as Spider-Man. I'm going to do what Spider-Man would do. I'm going to go off and tackle every little red triangle that I see, okay?
Yeah.
And it's a damn good way to get around in the game. I love catching a little wind tunnel. I love coming up on one and just
awesome.
Yeah, I love coming up on one and being like, I could swing into that, get a little boost, just whoosh, and then I'm up and away. I also think that those elements are like sort of taught to you and then implemented in side elements of the game, like when you're tracking down the little vulture drones, then you have to stay in that the wind tunnel to draft that thing to collect the data from it or whatever. It's just a really good, like, it's the polish, but it's like, it's an 11 out of 10 polish. Like, it's a damn good polish. You're like, it's basically a mirror that I'm looking in. That's how good the polish is.
I'm not even seeing the game because I'm just seeing myself because it's basically a mirror.
And you know what I see in that mirror?
TV's off.
What I see in that mirror? I see Spider-Man because it makes you feel like Spider-Man.
Shit. Yeah, well, I think that the action adventure for me, why it deserves that high of a bar, is that I think it does combine this action that you guys are talking about with the adventure, primarily for me, that comes from the spectacle of these the spectacle moments.
Yeah,
things like that opening Sandman fight or the Venom fight at the end, or
the Venom fight in Times Square too,
or the part where you're playing as Venom.
Yeah.
It's like all these different things, I think, lend there to be these like moments of sweeping action and spectacle that rival some of the best action spectacle moments that we've gotten in any of the Spider-Man movies, where the camera is panning around and the music is swelling. They're doing that as well here in Spider-Man 2, and that makes the adventureness of this game just feel next level. And so I agree that Tears of the Kingdom has this. I think this is probably the best chance of a category that Spider-Man 2 has, because this is a phenomenal action adventure game, one of the best action adventure games I've ever played. And I think it does that action side well because the physics and the combat are so fine-tuned and extraordinary. And I think because of the story it tells and the power of the SSD, they're able to have these scope and spectacle moments and variety of moments. I mean, none of the boss fights are even remotely similar.
No.
You've got this one where you're fighting Mysterio and you're in a giant snow globe and the world keeps like tumbling around you. And it's like, they thought they did it. They thought of everything. Like, they made the idealized Venom battle. They made the idealized Mysterio battle. It's like, Jesus Christ.
The lizard section in the fish market.
Oh my God.
Best horror game I played this year.
Compared to WarioWare Move It.
Yes, or Street Fighter 6. I don't know, but I mean, Tucker, I think you're right. It finds a way to make all these things feel much feel so different. There's multiple moments where they're just like, we'll just throw you in like a fantasy realm where you're just like, where it's like giant buildings falling into each other and like a soft gradient of red or white or whatever, and you're swinging through. It's just like, you just mix it up a little bit. You had fun swinging around New York, swing around this place that's like the inside of Peter Parker's mind for a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's look at the last category here. And we're going to pack a lunch because we're going to do something a little bit different. It's going to take a while to get through. This is the innovation and accessibility category. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the nominees, but I'm going to read them out as discussed by Steve Saylor on Twitter, who is a leading accessibility journalist for the games industry, also is an accessibility consultant on a bunch of games. So I would rather just read Steve's thoughts so we've got a more informed sense for both us and for the audience about what this category is, because I think one of the key failings of Jeff with this category is not making it clear to people why these games are nominated. Because I think it's very important, even more so than other categories, to highlight what is being done to make these games more accessible.
And
so
this is the first
let's
chance
go through
that we
this.
talk about this because Marvel Spider-Man 2 is the only game nominated for Game of the Year that also turned up in Innovation and Accessibility.
So these are all little blurbs that Steve wrote on Twitter about each game. We'll just link this thread in the description because then he also has an accessibility review for each of these if you want more details. But Steve says, first up in the nominees is Diablo 4. This is the most accessible Diablo game to date. It has a robust screen reader for blind players, amazing customizations for controls for motor disabled players, and just solid gameplay design for multiple disabilities. 3.5 out of 5 stars. Forza Motorsport innovated by making a racing game accessible to blind players so they can not only race but compete with its blind drive assist. Along with many accessibility options and gameplay design, it's the most accessible racing game ever. 5 out of 5 stars. Hi-Fi Rush was a surprise hit that I knew was an automatic contender for this category back in February. Its standout was the fact that it's an audio-based game but had extensive deaf, hard of hearing features so those players weren't missing out. 3 out of 5 star. Marvel Spider-Man 2, this one's a little bit out of date, as it writes here. Marvel Spider-Man 2, while is not fully accessible... Marvel Spider-Man 2, however... I'll fix the word for you there. Marvel Spider-Man 2, however, is not fully accessible and feature complete, as there is an extensive update coming out in December, which maybe we can speak about in a moment here. But my review so far is that it builds off of Insomniac's previous games and adds more. It's another accessibility win for Sony. Mortal Kombat 1 is the first game in the franchise to be built with blind players in mind, with menu narration, audio cues to know how close you are to your opponent, and those nasty audio-described fatalities. It's an amazing fighting game. 4.5 stars. And then the last one, Street Fighter 6 is also a surprise accessible hit for the fighting game genre. Its standout was the player progression to learn going from dynamic controls to modern to classic. It's the only one where getting good was accessible. 3.5 stars.
Sure. So I'll be the first to say that, I as the person who has played Spider-Man 2 in the month of December, I didn't know. I didn't look into any of the new accessibility options. So I guess my mistake there. But I just know that from a high level scenario or high level viewpoint that there's the obviously the web assists and stuff like that is a big accessibility option that a lot of people were talking about. But from the descriptors that you gave from Mr. Saylor over there, Abram, it seems like Forza Motorsport, and this is not just me being like, oh, you gave it 5 out of 5, so obviously it's gonna win. But making the first ever racing game that's accessible to blind players is fucking huge. That's a crazy thing that I don't even know how you set out to start doing, and they did it into a very successful degree, it seems like. So yeah, I would say that's one of the most incredible achievements in accessibility there is this year, or maybe of all time.
I would definitely agree. I would say that Forza does take it. I think it's important to contextualize the fact that, and I'll also link, I found an article here from Insomniac talking about all of their accessibility options, and it is sort of what has been the standard for PlayStation now since Last of Us Part 2, in pretty robust abilities to tweak gameplay modifiers for your to fit your abilities. A lot of control things, camera, audio, subtitles, visual, screen reader, all of that stuff, they have it. And it's really commendable of PlayStation in particular to, over the last many years, really foreground accessibility not only in their design but in their marketing, and being a leader in many ways for accessibility in games. But if there's anybody that's doing it better than them, it is Microsoft with their accessible controller and a lot of their initiatives.
Hey, they've got
so Forza to me,
they've got 3 of the games nominated here.
Yeah, yeah, they do,
because they bought Blizzard.
I think that true. I think that Microsoft's commitment to accessibility is on full display in Forza, and to bring a whole genre to the foreground of the need for accessibility options, to put these forth and blaze that trail and let new people experience the genre, I think is an unparalleled achievement this year. So I give it to that pretty easily. I'm also of the opinion that accessibility, mechanical accessibility, i.e. Street Fighter, is a lot less important in this category than than catering to people who have disabilities, because games through the lens of physical disability are still quite inaccessible. So I'm kind of personally really happy with the simple controls in Street Fighter, right? But to me, that's not the spirit of the category. This category is about illustrating how the biggest teams in the world are putting time and resources towards these features for a minority of players because their experience matters the same as everybody else's. So I think that Turn 10 and Microsoft easily deserve this award and will win it.
Nice.
And it's good to see people from across the industry, from fighting games to racing games to traditional action games, being nominated for this award, which shows that there's not necessarily as many genres that are being left untapped in terms of trying to push that forward. But sure. The Forza thing, crazy to me. So let's go with that in terms of prediction. But that,
I will just say the big publisher not nominated, never been nominated, needs to do better is Nintendo. Nintendo is about a decade behind on accessibility options, which is not a new sentiment, but
remapping button controls to ARMS in an update 3 months after launch.
And if that's not enough for a win, I don't know what is.
Now I have a question for you, gentlemen. Are you doing like a comprehensive every category predicting video at all? No. Is this a good time to just quickly slot in best adaptation since I'm much more familiar with all those?
Please do.
Okay,
Please do.
Best.
We actually did.
We talked about it last time.
We did. So here's what I want you to do, Tanner. Not only give your opinion, but then give what you think we said.
Okay. All right. So best adaptation is Castlevania Nocturne, the Netflix series, the film Gran Turismo based on a true story.
It doesn't say that there, which is sad. And you're a hack, Jeff Keighley.
The Last of Us, the HBO series, the Super Mario Bros. Movie from Universal, and Twisted Metal, the Peacock series. Of those...
Twisted Metal, a Peacock series.
Yes, exactly. Of those, I would say the best adaptation of a video game is probably The Last of Us, because I think it keeps the core story intact while also adding a lot of different stories and elements and just on the whole having great performances. But I'm going to guess that you guys said the Super Mario Bros. Movie because it looks like Mario.
We said Last of Us.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, good.
And that's absolutely going to win.
I think we're all agreed.
Can you fucking imagine?
It's obvious.
I mean, I think Super Mario Bros. Movie is probably second, right?
Yeah, probably, because no one gives a fuck about Twisted Metal or Gran Turismo.
Well, look, I think people watch the Castlevania show, but no one really cares. Not to the degree of Last of Us or Mario.
No, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry I undersold you, gentlemen. I also wasn't aware that either of you had seen The Last of Us.
No, I haven't.
Oh. Abram, have you seen The Last of Us?
I
can't say it's
not the whole thing, but yes,
okay.
I have.
I got you. Okay.
You watched some of it.
Yeah, I've seen half of it.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it will win. It's really not close. Are there any other categories here, Tanner? This is your moment. I guess except for Thursday night, because are you going to react with us?
No, I'm not. I'm going to a Christmas party, sadly.
No.
What else is going on here? Abram, if I could watch along with you, I really would. But I forgot when the Game Awards.
You'll be there.
I forgot when the Game Awards were, so I committed to the party first.
Fair enough.
Most anticipated game is interesting to me because if I were a game dev, and actually, this is a free idea, but between me and any team that wants to hire me, I would just make a trailer for the coolest looking game ever, and then just never release it and win most anticipated game every year. Just put out a new variation on that trailer every year and win the award every single time. Be the single most winningest studio of all time at the Game Awards.
To be honest, that's not that far off from like what CD Projekt did with Cyberpunk when they announced it literally 7 years before the game.
Okay, good, nice. Well, damn, my idea has been stolen.
Well, your idea is more novel because what you're saying is never release.
Never intend to either.
No, yeah. Just make cool looking trailers all the time.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, sure. What's gonna win? Just quickly, what do you guys think is gonna win most anticipated? Because I'm curious on that as well.
Probably Final Fantasy.
Final Fantasy. Okay.
Yeah, I think that Final Fantasy has the benefit of launching 2 months after, so everybody's kind of itching for it right now. I think it's either that or Hades, probably, but Hades isn't. Hades doesn't have the gas of fucking Final Fantasy.
It's Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, Hades 2, Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth, Star Wars Outlaws, and Tekken 8.
Yeah, it's true.
Just for your benefit, Tanner, I'm Star Wars.
The thought of making a joke ask to you crossed my mind. I was like, we should wrap it up. So let's wrap it up.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Thank you for joining us on our...
Wait, because we got to take the pin out. Tanner had a thought, and I told him put the pin in. Now you got to take the pin out.
It's interesting how in most of the categories that we talked about Spider-Man 2 in, the overarching simplified answer is that, yeah, it's great, but it's too polished. Like, that's really the thing. Is like it's too mainstream polished perfect to win the award, which is very interesting to me. That was the resounding answer.
I think it's it's actually something that'd be interesting to have a larger conversation about on the channel, and that I think that Sony has put Insomniac in a position where they really
they're in the contraption.
They are the only ones powering the contraption right now in a lot of ways. And I think what that inherently means is that they do not have the time to make Spider-Man 2 what Super Mario Wonder was to 2D Mario. Spider-Man 2 is more really, 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 really good Spider-Man. But I think that the issue is it's up against a slate of games that, while we're looking at almost exclusively sequels in Game of the Year, with the exception of Resident Evil 4, which I think that Spider-Man 2 is ahead of, the other ones here are doing more. Yeah. And I think what they're doing is they're not only operating at an extremely high bar of quality, but they're also doing more with the resources they have. And this is not an indictment of the quality of Spider-Man 2, as I've said a million times. I think what it really is frankly an indictment on Sony's larger team structure at the moment, that all of the weight is on the back of Insomniac. And what I'd really love to see is that to be taken off a little bit, and for them to have the time that Naughty Dog might have, or that Santa Monica might have, to say,
because those two teams, when they release the game, it wins Game of the Year, as opposed to, they'll be nominated, but they're not going to win.
Yeah,
it's the same as Guerrilla with Horizon right now. Guerrilla and Insomniac both make extremely, extremely good games in the exact way that you expect. And again, it goes back to my Blockbuster comment of before of that is definitely not a bad thing. But Game of the Year is almost always more than that.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's really what's tripping up Insomniac this time.
Yep. Interesting. All right. Anyone else have closing thoughts? Very good.
That's all 6, baby.
We did it.
It's like the 6 Infinity Stones in the Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, like little fucking Easter egg collector's edition thing.
We all did it collectively as a group of 3. We did it.
Yeah, good job, team.
Thank you.